Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading into a fascinating, if somewhat shadowy area. These hidden connections between organized crime, intelligence agencies, and some really powerful figures across the 20th century.
Yeah, it's quite a tangled web we're looking at.
We've got some incredibly detailed investigative material here, and our mission really is to unpack these, well, surprising intersections. We want to shed light on these often clandestine relationships that seem to have shaped major historical events.
Absolutely, moving beyond the sort of surface narratives.
Exactly. We're aiming for a clearer picture of these intertwined networks and their impact.
And what really jumps out from the source material right from the start is this idea of a very deep, um, long-lasting connection, even cooperation, really,
Yeah.
between organized crime and intelligence.
Especially starting around World War II.
Yeah, particularly with something called Operation Underworld, it
Yeah.
becomes clear just how much these worlds overlapped. Sometimes it's genuinely tough to see where one begins and the other ends.
So the implication is that many big events, maybe even scandals, of the last century.
Likely have these networks operating somewhere in the background, yes.
Okay, let's dig into these overlapping worlds. The material hints that, major scandals involved these networks, maybe even including some pretty unpleasant characters like sex traffickers and blackmailers.
Right. Figures like Epstein are mentioned as fitting into this pattern later on.
And it's quite something that powerful people, we're talking lawyers, businessmen, lobbyists with these, public reputations.
Might have been deeply involved in secret clandestine stuff.
Yeah. So what's the key takeaway about this blurring of lines?
I think it's about how power often seems to operate in hidden ways. These individuals, despite their public roles, apparently maintain these secret connections.
Suggesting we need to look beyond the official stories.
Exactly. To really understand certain events, you have to consider these deeper, less visible networks.
Okay, so where did it all really kick off? The sources keep pointing back to World War II and this Operation Underworld. What was that, and why was it so significant?
Well, it's fascinating how wartime needs create strange bedfellows, right? Operation Underworld was essentially the Office of Naval Intelligence, the ONI,
Mm-hmm.
working directly with major mob figures, people like Lucky Luciano.
Del Lucky Luciano.
The very same. The goal was to use the mob's control over the docks,
Mhm.
prevent sabotage, make sure supplies flowed smoothly for the war.
So, U.S. military intelligence actively working with organized crime.
Wow, that's the core of it. A surprising alliance, definitely.
And then there's the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the CIA's forerunner. The material describes it doing everything paramilitary stuff, espionage, but also being seen as a bit of a social club.
Yeah, the OSS is crucial because it's the foundation.
Hmm.
Its operations were so wide-ranging, they needed all sorts of skills and
And
contacts.
that's where people with maybe less conventional backgrounds came in handy.
Precisely. Individuals with ties to organized crime could be valuable assets. William J. Donovan, who led the OSS, was trying to pull together different intelligence efforts,
And he worked closely with the British.
very closely, with William Stevenson from British intelligence. That relationship really shaped the OSS. So, right from the start of modern U.S. intelligence, these kinds of unconventional partnerships were being formed.
Donovan and Stevenson, quite the early intelligence power duo. But the material also mentions some skepticism around the OSS, doubts about veteran stories.
Well, that touches on the nature of secret operations, doesn't it? Because it's secret, there's always room for speculation, maybe exaggeration.
Sure, makes sense.
After the war, some of the more, let's say, colorful tales from OSS veterans were met with a bit of skepticism, understandably.
But the basic fact of these unusual collaborations holds true.
Seems so, yeah. The underlying reality of the OSS engaging in these kinds of partnerships isn't really disputed.
And the OSS wasn't monolithic, right? You had military, FBI, even the FBI and the Narcotics Bureau.
Right, but the leadership often came from outside those traditional backgrounds, lawyers, businessmen.
Which makes sense for bringing in different skills. And there is this mention of Murray Gruffin, an assistant DA who handled the Luciano talks.
Later joining the OSS.
That seems like a very direct link between the legal system, organized crime negotiation, and intelligence.
It really highlights the fluidity we're talking about. Gruffin's experience with that Luciano deal would have given him a unique perspective on working outside normal channels.
And there are different versions of those Luciano negotiations.
Yes, historian Richard Harris Smith and OSS officer Earl Brennan apparently had conflicting accounts. which just shows how tricky it is to get a clear picture of these secret dealings.
So, beyond that initial WWI spark, the material talks about earlier criminal networks overlapping with intelligence interests, like Silvestro, Silver Dollar Sam Carolla in New Orleans. How does he fit in?
Carolla's story shows how organized crime was expanding, becoming more national. He's working with Costello and Luciano to get slot machines into New Orleans. Apparently with Huey Long's okay.
That shows growing political muscle.
Definitely. And what's really interesting is how this gambling operation then caught the eye of Meyer Lansky.
The big organizer.
Exactly. Lansky saw the potential to build, like, national communication hubs, money laundering centers. He was thinking big. Las Vegas-style casinos in New Orleans, bringing in new underworld figures.
That kind of organizational thinking, it almost mirrors intelligence work in a way.
In a dark way, perhaps. Building infrastructure, networks.
And it wasn't just individual gangsters. The material mentions these big dynastic corporate structures, the Keswick family, Jardine Matheson. Their ties to the British SOE during the war.
Right, connecting very high levels of society to covert ops.
How did that connect?
It shows how established power structures, even legitimate-seeming ones, could have these deep roots in the clandestine world. The fact that Henry Keswick's sons served in the SOE, especially in China.
Shows people moving between high finance and secret operations.
Exactly. And John Henry Keswick being a personal aide to Lord Mountbatten just underscores those elite connections.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the global drug trade and the offshore banking that enables it. The scale is just enormous.
Mind-boggling, really.
There's that quote from Antonio Maria Costa at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime saying drug money actually helped keep banks liquid during the 2008 crisis.
That is a pretty stunning statement, isn't it?
It really is.
What's fascinating is that open acknowledgement of how deeply the illegal economy is, well, embedded in the legitimate financial system. Costa's comment highlights this uncomfortable truth, that illicit money can, and apparently does, play a role in stabilizing major banks.
And it seems there were efforts to maybe obscure who the real players were in the drug trade back then. Harry Anslinger at the FBN, Agent George White, allegedly downplaying the role of the KMT, the Chinese nationalists.
While focusing heavily on the Chinese Communist Party as the big drug threat, yes.
Sounds like misdirection.
It raises that question, doesn't it? How political agendas can shape law enforcement priorities, even our perception of threats. Anslinger blaming the communists, claiming vast opium fields. It fit the anti-communist narrative of the time.
But potentially hid the KMT's involvement.
The source material certainly suggests that possibility, yeah?
Yeah.
A potential bias in their focus.
Then there's this concept of a supermob, this network connecting people across different sectors. Sidney Korshak, his ties to Mo Dalitz, setting up frontmen for Vegas casinos.
Right. That paints a picture of organized crime getting incredibly sophisticated, integrated into legitimate business.
So the supermob idea emphasizes they weren't just isolated gangs.
Exactly. They were deeply connected, influential across many areas. Korshak, the lawyer, facilitating the mob's entry into legitimate businesses like Vegas casinos. He's a perfect example of that integration. They needed clean fronts, documented wealth. Very sophisticated.
And Julius Caesar Stein, founder of MCA. This cozy relationship with Al Capone, even rumors Capone secretly owned part of MCA.
Yeah, that's the entertainment industry potentially being heavily influenced by organized crime.
At a very high level.
Proving direct ownership might be hard, but the close relationship. Capone reportedly steering Chicago entertainment business towards Stein and MCA. It suggests significant influence, maybe a financial stake.
The deep dive then explores some really hidden financial setups. Burton Cantor, the Pritzker family's tax attorney, his alleged connections to international crime networks, the CIA and Mossad.
That's quite a trio, isn't it?
It really is.
Cantor's story, especially that really complex kickback scheme with the San Francisco hotel takeover, it illustrates the intricate, often long-term nature of these hidden financial dealings.
And his alleged ability to navigate between high finance, crime, and intelligence.
Underscores that interconnectedness we keep seeing.
And that ICLR land sales fraud, the scale is huge, given Cantor's role in setting it up. Where did all that money go? Especially with his supposed intelligence link.
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Cantor's deep involvement strongly suggests he knew it was fraudulent. Where the stolen money ended up, especially given his alleged ties to clandestine networks that could use illicit funds, well, that remains murky.
Moving to booze and blackmail. We hear about Samuel Bronfman and his family's rise in the liquor business. Quite a journey from Bessarabian immigrants.
And despite their initial perhaps more modest aspirations.
They're bootlegging during Prohibition, expanding beyond the U.S. border into the Caribbean, Mexico.
It shows real ambition and adaptability, willingness to operate outside the law to build their empire. The charges they faced in 1934 for violating laws and tax evasion highlight the risks.
And this Reinfeld syndicate,
Hmm.
acting as a buffer between Seagrams and crime-linked customer.
That was the idea, seemingly. A middleman.
But then we find out Longies Willman, a notorious mobster, co-owned Reinfeld and dealt directly with Sam Bronfman.
Yes, that direct connection surfaces despite the attempted buffer. Zwillman's co-ownership and direct dealings really show the underlying links.
And Bronfman apparently had a positive view of Zwillman.
According to the sources, yes, which highlights that surprising level of acceptance, maybe even respect, between these seemingly separate worlds.
The compromised power structures section.
Yeah.
This is really something. The alleged 1958 Plaza Hotel party.
Witnessed by Kaufman, involving her husband Louis Rosenstiel, Roy Cohn.
And FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Dressed in women's clothing, introduced as Mary.
That's the account given. And Mary was supposedly also a nickname for Cardinal Spellman, who allegedly attended similar parties.
Hoover and Cardinal Spellman, it's a lot.
It certainly paints a vivid, if potentially disturbing, picture of powerful figures in compromising situations. If Kaufman's account is accurate, it suggests significant entanglement. Law enforcement, political operatives, even religious leaders.
In activities ripe for blackmail.
Precisely. And control.
And the material mentions Rothstein confirming Cohn claimed he was entrapped and blackmailed into these things.
Yes, adding another layer. Plus, those broader allegations. American intelligence and organized crime working together to blackmail Hoover years earlier.
Suggests a long history of using compromat.
Exactly. The idea that Hoover himself could be a target of blackmail by both intel agencies and the mob really underscores how pervasive these power dynamics might have been. Rothstein's account suggests even those seemingly in control could be vulnerable.
Okay, let's move into geopolitical alignments and hot money. Nicaragua providing arms to the Haganah in 47 when Truman had an embargo, Somoza profiting.
And then later, Israel arming Somoza and eventually the Contras. It's tangled history.
What does that historical context show us?
It shows how geopolitical needs create these unusual partnerships, and how relationships formed decades ago can shape later events. Israel needing arms from Nicaragua initially, then later supplying arms to the Contras. It highlights shifting alliances and the continuation of certain networks.
And then this merging, Zionist interests with organized crimes, real estate, casinos, slush funds in the Caribbean, leading to intercontinental expansion.
That seems to be a key moment, where financial interests, political goals, and criminal enterprises really converged.
And the Caribbean was the hub.
With its offshore finance and proximity to the U.S., it became a natural center for these intertwined activities. Made it easier for hot money to flow and networks to expand globally.
We meet Tibor Rosenbaum, a war hero, apparently.
Who later gets involved in less heroic activities in this hot money web.
Yes. It seems like a recurring theme, people with legitimate pasts drawn into this clandestine world.
Rosenbaum's story is a classic example. Wartime experience, valuable connections, transitioning into intelligence and sometimes illicit finance. The contrast between his heroism and later activities highlights the lure of wealth and influence.
The Miami Group organized crime-linked Jewish businessmen, holdings in Florida and Israel, setting up Dan Hotels, Israel Oil Ventures.
And Israel Oil Ventures had alleged direct ties to organized crime through Rimrock Tidelands and Santos Sorge, described as a key mafia figure.
That's a direct link between the mob and the early Israeli oil industry.
It really underscores the early reliance, perhaps necessity, of the new Israeli state on various sources of capital and influence, even questionable ones. Sorge's involvement highlights the international reach of organized crime into legitimate industries.
Then Bruce Rappaport sets up Intermaritime Bank, IMB, in '65 with A and B shareholders.
And the Class B shareholders linked to banks dealing with Rappaport, including Weiss Credit, a switch bank allegedly used by Italian organized crime.
Rappaport seems central here.
IMB looks like a crucial node in this offshore finance network. The shareholder structure, the Weiss Credit connection, it all suggests IMB was designed to move illicit funds and facilitate secret activities.
And both Rappaport and Rosenbaum had ties to Liberia. Rosenbaum managing a finance corporation that helped capitalize the Bank of Liberia.
Yes, and capital also reportedly flowed in from institutions linked to the Rockefeller family.
Liberia seems key.
Its history of, let's say, flexible governance and offshore rules made it attractive for these kinds of financial dealings. The involvement of Rappaport, Rosenbaum, and Rockefeller linked to capital shows the complexity spanning continents and different financial worlds.
Permindex, Bloomfeld, and Rothschild, bringing in some very big names. Louis Mortimer Bloomfeld, rumored OSS links, communicating with British spymaster William Stevenson, involved with Permindex CMC.
Bloomfeld's background certainly suggests potential links between intelligence and high finance. His communication with Stevenson, membership in elite groups like the Order of St. John, it points to an influential network. Permindex CMC's alleged intel ties make his involvement more intriguing.
And Compagnie Financière, now the Edmond de Rothschild Group, owning 10% of a Permindex real estate venture,
Right.
with François Pereire and Edmond de Rothschild involved.
And Rothschild was also, for a time, a business partner of Tabor Rosenbaum in the Israel Corporation, though that ended in scandal, with Rosenbaum accused of bilking the company.
These are giants of global finance.
The Rothschild and Pereire involvement shows how established European financial power intersected with these networks. Even though the Rosenbaum partnership soured, their initial collaboration shows major players engaging with individuals connected to less conventional spheres.
Then there's Tricontinental Pipelines, a Canadian oil company in Israel. Rothschild, Pereire, and Bloomfeld were involved.
Yes, controlling a key pipeline alongside the Miami Group and the Palestine Economic Corporation, or PEC.
And PEC was a conduit for Wall Street money into Israeli industries.
Exactly. This complex web, Israel, Italy, France, Canada, tied to Caribbean hot money, capital flowing into Israel, raw materials flowing out. It emphasizes the global nature of these interconnected networks. PEC, linking Wall Street to Israeli development, potentially influenced by these hidden players.
Let's look at organized crime's political influence. Marinelli ties to the mob back to Prohibition, Lucky Luciano managing his trucking company.
And Luciano then helping Marinelli become the first Italian-American district leader at Tammany Hall.
That's serious political clout.
Marinelli's story really shows how organized crime could directly infiltrate and influence city politics, like in New York. Luciano helping him rise in Tammany Hall shows their ability to manipulate the process, eventually gaining control over things like grand jury selection, vote counting, real political power.
Cohen's family connections and methods. Looking at Roy Cohen's background, his grandfather and uncle's influence, his mother's brother, Joshua Lionel Cohen, co-founding Lionel Corporation.
Even the toy train company has a surprising link back to early 20th century business and government contracts.
What's the main point there?
It's a reminder that influence is often built over generations through seemingly unrelated industries. Cowen's early work, the Navy contract financing Lionel, it shows how government connections, defense spending have long shaped business. His directorship of the Bank of the United States when it collapsed also hints at potential vulnerabilities in these circles.
And the Pope family's mafioso-style deals, controlling concrete Italian immigrant voters.
And Roy Cohen adopting a similar system he called his favor bank.
How did that work?
The Pope's leveraged control over industries and voters. Cohen's favor bank, as Gene Pope Jr. described it, was about personal favors, behind-the-scenes deals influencing judicial and political appointments, a system of traded influence.
Mossad-linked arms smuggling introduces A. Newman. Arno Newman-Nijman and his family bank, later tied to illegal arms, deals with Israeli intelligence in the 80s during Iran-Contra.
Yes, and despite the bank going bankrupt from these deals, apparently no legal consequences for the family, which raises questions.
Definitely.
The involvement of figures like David Bentley or Esley and his brother Abner, who worked with the Mossad-connected Mark Rich, further strengthens the link between Israeli intelligence and these alleged illicit arms deals. Belgian reporter Willy van Dam claimed both as the Lou brothers worked for Mossad.
Moving to the Profumo affair, one version has David Bruce, former OSS chief, getting Corbally involved to get info on Profumo. Another suggests Stephen Ward confessed to them seeking help.
And then there's that long-standing allegation, Meyer Lansky having compromising material on Hoover way back in the 30s.
Plus, the escalating collection of dirt on both the Kennedys and Hoover in the 60s, especially with Robert Kennedy's war on the mob.
It sounds like a world awash in blackmail material, doesn't it?
It really does. What's the takeaway about compromised information?
The Profumo affair seems like a nexus point. The different accounts of Corbally's role highlight the secrecy and potential manipulation. The allegations about Hoover and the Kennedys underscore the ruthless nature of power politics and the potential role of organized crime and intelligence in those games.
And the timing Perfumo blowing up during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, potentially impacting Keeler's decision to go public, and even scuttling Ivanov and Ward's attempts to use Ward as a back channel for a potential summit adds another layer of complexity.
Then, private intelligence networks. OSS veteran Ulises Amos forms the International Services of Information Foundation, seemingly a CIA friend.
Appearing later in relation to Robert Maxwell, yes.
And Corbely's mentor, John G. Steve Brody, a PI with legal troubles, working for Amos's foundation's main backer, Clendenin Ryan.
Ryan connected to Amos's private intel outfit, and Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's former intel chief, was a trustee. It looks like a shadowy world operating outside official channels.
What does this tell us about the intelligence landscape, then?
It highlights the privatization of intelligence. These networks, often started by ex-operatives funded privately, could operate outside direct government control, maybe doing politically sensitive or legally dubious work. Brody's involvement blurs the lines further.
Rosenstale, Riklis, Baird, and Simonenko. Meshulam Riklis takes over Louis Rosenstale's empire and townhouse, Baird advising Stanley Warner Corps dealing with Simonenko. Riklis also trying to acquire Stanley Warner.
It's a snapshot of the financial maneuvering behind the scenes.
What does it show?
How power and wealth consolidate through mergers acquisitions, and how individuals connected to different networks, crime, intelligence, finance, could be key players. Riklis taking over Rosensteel, the Stanley Warner dealings. It illustrates the complex interplay of money and connections.
The brief mention of the Bank of United States scandal collapsing in 1930 with Joshua Lionel Cowan, the Lionel guy, as a director.
Just serves as a historical reminder, right? That even seemingly solid figures and institutions could be touched by financial trouble. It underscores interconnectedness and potential vulnerabilities.
Roy Cohn's fixer reputation again, Stanley Friedman saying Cohn could fix anyone in the city, his favor bank acting as a go-between for criminals, elites, media.
Really cemented his power as a political fixer, especially noted during Reagan's 1980 campaign.
What's the key insight about Cohn's influence?
His ability to navigate these complex worlds, politics, media, underworld made him incredibly influential. His favor bank system, being the connector, allowed him to exert significant power, particularly influencing political outcomes and appointments.
The United Dye Webb and Edwin Wilson. Robert Crowley from the CIA claiming Hill and Knowlton's overseas offices were perfect cover for the ever-expanding CIA. Crowley as the agency's liaison to business.
Even suggesting Crowley might have helped bring George H.W. Bush into the CIA via Zapata Petroleum.
That suggests a very deep integration of the CIA and the business world.
Crowley's statements really reveal the extent the CIA apparently used business for cover and ops. Zapata Petroleum potentially being a front underscores these deep, sometimes hidden, relationships between intel, business, and politics. Robert Keith Gray's likely ties are also mentioned.
Operation Paper and early drug trade complicity. Erskine in Southeast Asia in 1950, developing Operation Paper to support KMT fighters in Burma, involving CIA operatives like Paul Helliwell.
Using fronts like Sea Supply and the World Commerce Corporation for arms flow.
And Peter Dale Scott argues this was a key point where U.S. intelligence became complicit in the global drug trade. That's a heavy charge.
It is. Scott's argument highlights a critical and controversial aspect of Cold War intel ops. Supporting anti-communist forces while fitting U.S. goals allegedly involved facilitating or ignoring drug trafficking, a potential turning point in the intel-drug trade relationship.
The China lobby and its networks. Willoughby's links, others using McCarthyism to settle scores.
Including Chinese nationalists, Alfred Kohlberg, Norman Larson mentioned too, tied to an anti-communist youth group with alleged CIA links founded by Tongson Park and Douglas Caddy.
What does this show about Cold War dynamics?
The China lobby's influence went beyond advocacy. Its ties to figures like Willoughby, its use of McCarthyism, it demonstrates the power private groups with intel connections could wield in shaping U.S. foreign and domestic policy.
The Georgetown Club. Sensitive location politics, crime, CIA. A concern for the CIA because Tongson Park, a known KCIA asset, was behind it.
So they sent Edwin P. Wilson to monitor it, concerned about Koreagate-type activities.
Sounds like a dangerous intersection of interests.
It seems like a central meeting point where powerful, sometimes competing interests converged. The CIA's concern and Wilson's monitoring underscored the delicate balance and potential for espionage even in social settings.
The Southeast Asian heroin trade. Opium refined in the Golden Triangle, heroin exported via Hong Kong, attracting American organized crime.
Figures like Meyer Lansky, sending his agent John Pullman to investigate, and Sando Traficante arriving in Hong Kong and Saigon.
Leading to new courier routes.
Apparently, Filipino and Caribbean rings delivering Hong Kong heroin to mafia distributors in the U.S. linked to Traficante's territory shows the global expansion and adaptability of these drug networks.
Edwin Wilson again, with TF-157, allowed to keep earnings from commercial fronts like World Marine, Maryland Maritime.
Operating from the same offices as Consultants International, where Robert Keith Gray was on the board.
And around world shipping in Houston, later part of Shackley's private CIA, Wilson was building quite an infrastructure.
Wilson's TF-157 work highlights the blurring lines between official ops and private ventures in the intel world, operating commercial fronts, accumulating earnings, underscores the potential for personal enrichment in these networks. Gray's connection shows how interconnected they were.
TF-157 was also involved in Nixon and Kissinger's secret opening to China, part of Detente.
Yes, a very sensitive initiative where the Joint Chiefs and the CIA were largely sidelined.
Shows extreme secrecy and compartmentalization at the top.
Absolutely. Nixon and Kissinger exerted incredible control, highlighting bureaucratic battles and the lengths they went to maintain secrecy.
The tilt for Pakistan and the alleged leak to Jack Anderson, potentially by Waylander or Moorer using TF-157 info and Radford's pilfered documents.
To undermine Kissinger's China efforts, possibly. A complex situation of internal maneuvering and potential sabotage.
What does that episode reveal?
Intense power struggles within the Nixon administration. The alleged leak suggests a willingness to use sensitive intel to sabotage policies, highlighting the high stakes.
Watergate's origins. The material calls them murky. Russell, working for both DNC Security and McCord Associates, owned by former CIA operative McCord, plus part-time for CRP.
It definitely raises doubts about the official story.
Russell and McCord's ties to both sides, McCord's CIA background, suggest something more complex.
Possibly. Overlapping connections. Potential hidden agendas. It points away from a simple break-in narrative. McCord's temporary detail to David Atlee Phillips for an anti-Castro operation is also noted, raising questions about prior links to Hunt.
And why were the Plumbers Nixon's secret unit full of CIA agents? Why was Hunt feeding info to the CIA when Nixon was trying to curb its power?
It's a crucial question challenging the conventional wisdom. The CIA presence, Hunt's actions, suggest deeper, maybe conflicting agendas. Possibly elements in the CIA protecting their own interests. Kissinger later noted Nixon saw the CIA as hostile Ivy Leaguers.
E. Howard Hunt then works for Robert R. Mullen and Company after his CIA retirement, a firm closely aligned with the CIA, providing cover overseas.
And Mullen helped form the anti-Castro Cuban Freedom Committee. Seems Hunt's deed very connected.
It underscores that revolving door, doesn't it, between government, intel, and private firms doing similar work. The firm's CIA alignment shows former operatives continued supporting U.S. policy objectives. Mullen's attorney, Edward Bennett Williams, also represented Robert Vesco.
And what about Bob Woodward's background? Navy communications officer, served under figures later involved in the Radford-Moorer espionage ring.
His Pentagon assignment in '69 put him near key players because of his comms expertise.
It adds another layer to his role in breaking Watergate right. His proximity to military and intel figures raises questions about potential sources and information flow.
Then there's the theory about John Dean ordering the Watergate break-in himself to get damaging info related to the Watergate Columbia Plaza ring linked to his future wife via Heidi Reekin.
With alleged organized crime ties and rumors of prostitution involving D.C. elites.
That's an explosive theory.
Speculative, but intriguing. Suggests a more personal, scandalous motive. The Reekin connection, the rumors, create a scenario where Dean might have felt compelled to act preemptively.
Jaworski working closely with Alexander Haig during Watergate. Haig is a channel for information, even non-subpoenaed stuff, to Jaworski.
Suggests Haig had a significant, if quiet, role in shaping the prosecution. His anti-Castro Ox background adds more intrigue.
The Page Boy scandal. Gray allegedly involved. Salerno arranging Jackie Presser's Teamsters appointment. Presser close to Gray. Schaffler offered a job he saw as a bribe.
Then the abuse allegations get swept aside after the accuser recants, and the accused congressman was on the ethics committee.
That points to potential corruption and influence peddling at high levels, and a disturbing potential cover-up. Craig's later arrest adds another dimension.
Ted Shackley's network, largely funded by Edwin Wilson.
Wilson lending Thomas Klein's money for IRT, which included SSI, registered in Bermuda, supposedly trading securities, but wasn't, and API distributors in Houston, supplying oil companies.
It looks like Wilson was building his own private intel and business operation. Underscores the privatization of intel and use of commercial fronts. Offshore registration hides the true nature.
The Beebe network in Houston.
Yeah.
Herman Beebe as the financial brain, long criminal ties involved in the SNL collapse.
Also, Walter Mischer, his son-in-law, Robert Corson, indicted for money laundering. Houston seems like a key hub.
Why Houston?
Energy sector, Gulf Coast location. Strategic for various illegal activities like money laundering, maybe arms trafficking, Beebe's criminal ties, Corson's indictment. Highlight the intersection of crime and high finance there. Brenna Key claiming Corson laundered CIA money adds complexity.
Allied Bank shares in Houston. Howard Terry, Gerald Smith, Mischer's right-hand man, banking ties to crime in Beebe. Jack T. Trotter, Mischer associate, ties to Duncan family, Gerald Hines.
Possible links to Iran-Contra land speculation through projects like the Galleria. The connections seem endless.
What does this web show?
How Houston's elite leverage networks across industries, banking, real estate, maybe secret ops like Iran-Contra, suggests illicit funds potentially move through big developments.
Could Wilson and Norman Leaf Moss have met before 1966? Wilson worked CIA AFL-CIO ops under Cord Meyer, which merged with covert action staff overseeing Moss's operation.
Given the close-knit intel community, overlapping operations, especially Miami Station, Cuban exiles, it's plausible they crossed paths earlier. Shared contacts like Shackley and Klein support this.
Robert Vesco, the Detroit Kid, major white-collar crime figure. Mitchell Werbel III suspected he was CIA. Watergate's Rosetta Stone.
His takeover and looting of that International Mutual Fund linked to crime and the CIA, trying to control Resorts International, he seems deeply embedded.
What made him so key?
His rapid rise-fall, connections to both crime and the CIA-adjacent financial world. Werbel's suspicion underscores the difficulty in knowing loyalties in these realms.
Vesco's jet found in Costa Rica, paid for by Frigoríficos de Punta Arenas, a shrimp company used by state debt for Contra aid.
And Frigoríficos also linked to cocaine transport and money laundering. Another example of legitimate businesses used as fronts.
Recurring pattern, isn't it?
Using seemingly legitimate businesses for illegal arms, drugs, money laundering. Frigoríficos shows how aid efforts and secret ops could dangerously blur. Links mentioned to Shanes, Nunez, Millian Rodriguez, Luis Rodriguez.
Vesco even offered services to Charter Oil using his Libyan connections. Met them about acquiring old iOS subsidiaries.
Shows his reach into international business, willingness to leverage connections with controversial regimes for profit.
The iOS downfall. King Resources, Edward Cowett's plot to help King take control from Kornfeld. Failed. King bankrupted. Vesco gets the mutual fund.
A complex tale of corporate intrigue setting the stage for Vesco's later moves. Highlights the ruthless tactics and instability in international finance.
CSF Investments. Bermuda subsidiary set up in '82. Legal work by Conyers Dillon Pierman, linked to Coastal Caribbean Oils, where Secret owned stock.
And CSF Investments used to buy aircraft for Contra support. A clear link between offshore finance and secret paramilitary support.
Demonstrates the role of offshore centers like Bermuda in facilitating covert ops.
Absolutely. CSF Investments, Conyers Dillon Pierman, secret stock illustrate the mechanisms used to channel funds for Contra support.
IDEA, formed by Thomas Kleins, and the Council for Democracy, Education, and Assistance by Robert Owen, both supporting Contras. Retired General John Flynn on the council.
Reportedly recruited by Hull. Council got donations mainly via Carl Spitz channels, fundraising North's primary vehicle for private Contra donations via his tax-exempt foundation, NEPL.
Shows the network of individuals and groups involved in this covert op.
Highlights the coordinated efforts, some with direct intel ties, in providing private, sometimes clandestine Contra support.
The World Anti-Communist League, U.S. Council for World Freedom, connected to pressure groups, dark money fronts, private intel.
Advocating specific Cold War policies, free trade, limiting civil labor rights, a broader ideological network.
With potential intelligence links and a clear political agenda.
Seems so. Represented a network pushing particular policies, often aligning with intel and right-wing objectives. Some groups, like American Security Council, allegedly involved in PSYOPs. Council for National Policy brokering Evangelical New Right Alliance mentioned. High Frontier Lobbying SDI, U.S. Strategy Council coordinating Intel Ops Unification Church.
Maxwell and Safra. Long friendship. Safra allegedly letting Maxwell use R&D accounts for laundering East European money.
And Maxwell deeply involved in illicit tech transfers to the Soviet sphere via Bulgaria and Kintex. Bulgarian intel's trading company.
Shows the intersection of media empires, high finance, Cold War espionage.
A complex, morally ambiguous picture. Maxwell's alleged use of RNB, tech transfers, underscores interconnectedness of media, finance, intel across the East-West divide.
Khashoggi's ties to mainland savings. Mario Renda's visit to Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi backing Renda's failed I-Paid venture, long relationship.
Renda and Schwimmer depositing in 130 failed SNLs. Rumors Renda controlled money for Paul Castellano, Roy Cohn client.
And that $5 million line of credit from mainland to Khashoggi right before the Iran arms transfers, which relied on Khashoggi's $5 million advance.
A tangled web, isn't it? Financial dealings potentially linking organized crime, high finance, Iran-Contra.
What's the key connection here?
It points to a network exploiting the financial system. Failed SNLs, alleged mafia links, questionable loans to Khashoggi, all potentially funding clandestine activities or personal gain. Concealment of the credit line. Khashoggi's conflicting claim Roland provided the money, which Roland denied. Mainland saying it was a guarantee for Khashoggi buying mainland stock, funded by mainland itself, adds to the murkiness.
The Iran arms embargo, the powder cartel headed by Bofors Nobel trying to move propellant powder to Iran.
London is a major hub for arms trafficking to Iran since '81. BR&W Industries, the Aspens. Evidence of TOW missiles moved, disguised as lift trucks.
Highlights efforts to bypass restrictions for profit during conflict.
Despite embargoes, conflict created a lucrative market. The cartel, individuals like Banerjee and the Aspens, show arms merchants willing to break laws for money.
Londro acquiring Cunanadel in '81, around when Iran arms ops developed. Belgium a major hub. The ATLS dossier detailing the Nebula.
A network in arms diamond drug trafficking centered on Felix Przborski in Costa Rica suggests a sophisticated international network.
How does this connect?
Lonro, buying KNN, the ATLS dossier, paints a picture of established international networks in various illegal activities, arms trafficking key. Belgium's role and Przborski's leadership underscore the organized cross-border nature. A Lonro freight subsidiary allegedly involved in Wilson's Libya activities for Shackley's network shortly before the KNN deal suggests another possible link.
A possible direct link between these networks and early '80s Iran arms flow through Abraham Shavit.
Shavit, Boaz's manager at ASCO, named in Antiel as part of Przborski's group, described as Boaz's right arm.
With deep Israeli connections, President of Manufacturers Association, chairman of LL, alleged Intel front.
Reported former Intel officer, close associate of Manuel J. Pyers, CIA-employed arms trafficker later involved in Iran sales, created a potential direct channel.
What's the key connection then?
Shavit's extensive Israeli connections, industry leadership, alleged Intel ties, association with Pyers provide a compelling link between the European network, ATLS dossier, and early Iran arms flow. His association with both Przborski and Pyers suggests potential coordination across networks.
Rumsfeld visiting Saddam Hussein in '83 and '84 to normalize relations despite condemning chemical weapon use.
Highlights the complex, sometimes contradictory nature of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War, pragmatic, morally challenging decisions pursuing strategic goals, tension between values and interests.
Schultz ex Bechtel sending Rumsfeld. Other Bechtel figures like Weinberger and Reagan's admin, big booster of the enterprise involved in Iran transfers.
And Schultz and Weinberger had a long-running feud. Adds a layer of personal and corporate interest to Iran-Contra.
Shows the interplay.
Exactly. High-ranking officials tied to Bechtel, differing views on the enterprise. Complex interplay of personal relationships, corporate interest, political ideologies influencing events like Iran-Contra.
Rocket hearings. Clarified relationship between DCCI and B&L's Italian leadership.
Mentioning Ferrari, ex-B&L managing director, P2 Masonic Lodge ties, and his close connections to Pakistani nationals connected to BCCI, Roberto Calvi, Ponco Ambrosiano, the corrupt Vatican Bank, revealing a network of questionable financial institutions and individuals. Alleged close work with Florio, B&L International, and Vatican Bank too.
The supermarket arms operation, run by Martin and McCoy, not Casey's network, trying to profit from the Contra slush fund.
Shows the Secord-led enterprise wasn't the only game in town.
What does that tell us about the scale?
Highlights the opportunism. Individuals trying to capitalize on covert Contra support. Potential for corruption, self-interest within these networks. Suggests wider illicit activity than just sanctioned ops.
Felix Rodriguez boasting about his very close relationship with the Vice President George H.W. Bush, causing problems.
Yes, North's notebook mentions Felix talking too much about VP connection. Notes from an NSC VP office meeting discuss easing Felix out on her Felix claims working WVP blessing for CIA, mentioning contacts.
So Rodriguez became a liability due to his loose talk.
Clearly caused concern. Awareness of the potential damage he could inflict on covert ops.
The Vision Bank deal. Money moved to Bank Can Trade in Jersey, where Jack Creeman hid drug money.
Freeman and Ron Martin of the supermarket used the same attorney, Theodore Klein. Jew Militech also got offshore finance managers from Cantrade.
Points to shared financial infrastructure for illicit activities.
Suggests a common offshore network facilitating various illegal acts. Shared bank, shared attorney. Underscores the interconnectedness.
S. Cass Weiland, Corson's attorney, prominent in North's notebooks, linked to supermarket figures.
And North's 84 Belize project involved Weiland, then Senate counsel, and Cuban exile Sergio Broll. Broll, later a key contact for Ron Martin and John Molina, murdered Cuban-American businessman.
Shows overlap between individuals and different covert ops.
Illustrates the interconnectedness. Weiland linked to supermarket figures and the Belize project, Broll linked to Martin. Suggests collaboration across seemingly separate operations, a network where people wore multiple hats.
BCCI presenting itself as a development bank in the Third World, gaining access.
Significant lending to Congo. Ties, Broad's alleged, with Cameroon's finance ministry, cultivating UN-US embassy ties there. Close ties to Nigeria's central bank.
Even alleged cash handouts at a World Bank meeting.
Paints a picture of a bank deeply enmeshed in potentially corrupt practices, wielding significant influence in developing nations.
Was Gokul fronting for BCCI and Rappaport's organization? Given Rappaport's many BCCI ties, top money manager Hartman, a BCCI frontman, Rappaport's stake in Bank of New York, a BCCI correspondent bank.
Burt Lance testified Rappaport was sent by Casey to spy on him and BCCI, though Lance didn't disclose his son worked at Rappaport's bank. Complex, potentially deceptive relationship.
Raises questions about true nature, hidden agendas.
Definitely. Lance's testimony, while revealing suspicions, highlights the complexities and potential conflicting loyalties.
Robert Vesco again. Libyan affairs, trying to get embargoed planes, C-130s, released to Libya, negatively impacted Carter admin.
Reinforces his role as a significant international player connected to controversial regimes.
What does this tell us about his influence?
His ongoing Libya involvement, attempts to circumvent embargoes, demonstrates continued influence, willingness to engage with regimes at odds with the U.S., even causing political headaches. Suggests reach beyond just finance.
Ripa claimed FIDCO was an NSC corporate cutout for financing Lebanon reconstruction.
And alleged contact with Promise software via an IBM Tel Aviv system dealing with FIDCO, linking Promise to potential covert ops in the Middle East.
If true, that's a direct link.
Between Promise and covert Mideast activities, allegedly via an NSC front. The IBM Tel Aviv mention raises more questions about Promise distribution and use in Intel ops.
Nichols forms Meridian Arms with Zokoski, later joins Wackenhut in Cabazon activities. Rikanoshido, briefly VP.
Meridian Arms, part of Meridian International Logistics. Board included Jan Quinto, MCA Home Entertainment president.
MCA's Lou Wasserman had deep mob ties, Dalits, key to Reagan's career. DOJ probed an MCA mob ties allegedly squashed by Mies.
Senator Howard Baker, MCA board, later advised Maxwell entering New York alongside Tower and Robert Keith Gray. Baker also partnered with Maxwell.
The connections. Defense contractors, entertainment, mob, politics. Striking. Key takeaway.
A remarkable convergence of disparate sectors. Defense, Wackenhut, entertainment, MCA, crime, Dalits, Wasserman, politics, Reagan, Baker, Mies. Alleged probe suppression, Baker-Maxwell link, underscore potential for powerful networks to operate across boundaries with impunity. Shows how these spheres intertwined and supported each other.
Rosocio contacts Hamilton to investigate Mike Abel, ex-DOJ. Hamilton passes it to Danny Casolaro.
Casolaro investigated ties between Abel, Nichols, and Gilberto Rodriguez, Cali cartel leader.
Cali cartel linked to Contra support and E-systems.
Yes. Abel later convicted for Cali cartel activities after a '94 FBI raid. Shows a direct link. Ex-DOJ official, drug cartel, potentially connected to Contra ops.
Disturbing potential penetration.
Underscores how far cartels could reach.
CDC, Controlled Data Corp. Allegedly hired Edwin Wilson as consultant 76, not just selling old computers, maybe illegal stuff like bugging U.S. Army Material Command.
CDC's claims of no involvement in illicit tech transfers to Soviets seem dubious, given these associations.
Suggests CDC was more than just computers.
Likely. Allegations of illegal bugging, Cold War context, suggest claims of innocence are questionable.
CDC providing services to World Bank by 83. Promise software found there same year tracking wire transfers. Sworn statement.
Also, info suggests U.S. DOJ delivered Vax Promise to World Bank in 83, an institution outside U.S. court discovery. World Bank says no record.
Possible CDC promise link via Deputy AG Jensen under Meese.
Strongly suggests Promise used in ways avoiding oversight. World Bank location, alleged DOJ delivery,
Right.
raised serious concerns about intended use, potential exploitation outside the law. Jensen connection underscores government official involvement.
Robert Maxwell. Expanding contacts alongside media empire. BPC MCC Mirror, Macmillan NY Daily News. Allegations of money borrowed from his companies funding Mossad ops. Money later returned.
But then Maxwell misused these funds himself. Suggests a complex, potentially exploitative relationship with Israeli intelligence. Alleged use of empire's finances for Mossad, then misusing them. Paints a picture of complex, maybe opportunistic, ties. Highlights potential for powerful individuals to leverage resources for national security and personal gain.
The Inslaw affair promise scandal starts with alleged Israeli theft modification of promise.
Earl Bryan tries marketing bugged Promise via Hadron Inc., SCT, financed by Allen & Co., ties to crime, Leslie Wexner. Bryan connected to Tesla, lawyer for Epstein-linked Gouletis, Wexner board member. Allen & Co., big stake in Hadron.
Bryan tries buying out Inslaw, fails. Contacts A.G. Meese, whose wife invested in Bryan's ventures. DOJ allegedly uses Promise free.
Rick Inocido confirms modifying Promise, names Bryan mastermind. Claims government targeted him after supporting Hamilton's case. North allegedly used Promise for COG starting 82 to list U.S. dissidents. Senior official confirmed in 08.
Seems incredibly far-reaching, disturbing. Key takeaway on Promise.
A deeply troubling chain. Alleged theft, weaponization of software, potential links to Israeli intel, financiers tied to crime, high-ranking U.S. officials. Alleged use tracking dissidents for COG is chilling, underscores potential for government overreach. Tech abuse.
E-Systems potential links. To Shackley's team, Vesco in Libya, Contra support, CIA-linked aviation.
With the Lanhorland-Duqan connection as a common thread, Duqan's iOS role, Tradewind's alleged arms running to Libya for Wilson, Vesco's Libya activities hitting Carter admin, suggests a network involved in various clandestine activities. Libya, a recurring point.
Shows interconnectedness.
Of clandestine networks, yeah. E-Systems potentially linked to Shackley, Vesco, Contra's Lonhro connection, Roland Duqan, illustrates overlap between legit business and covert ops across locations. Libya, significant.
RNB, Republic National Bank. Fed's main agent injecting money into Russia 92, over $80 billion. Benefited organized crime as recipient banks were criminal enterprises. Funds moved offshore via networks like BONY.
Allegations BOI laundered IMF funds too. Russian Finance Ministry claims some money went into an RNB account for foreign exchange sales. Novaya Gazeta reported Safra gave evidence to FBI around when RNB reported BONY. Safra spoke with FBI for a year.
Suggests massive post-Cold War financial scandal. U.S.-Russian institutions, organized crime.
Seems so. Massive dollar influx into Russia, apparently exploited by organized crime, laundered via Western banks like BONY. Safra RNB actions suggest complex, potentially criminal exploitation of post-Soviet finance on a huge scale.
Allegations cited by John DeCamp, intelligence sources claiming Alejos Arzo-led Covenant House branch procured children for a U.S. pedophile ring.
Similar accusations against Mi Casa, another U.S.-run charity in Guatemala visited by the Bushes in '94. Deeply disturbing allegations.
Suggests potential infiltration.
Extremely serious allegations. Potential for charitable groups to be exploited for horrific child abuse. Alleged links to intel community prominent figures underscores terrible potential for abuse of power and trust.
CIG Spence's glittery parties for Reagan-Bush officials, media, military, allegedly burged to compromise guests.
Washington Times links Spence to a homosexual prostitution ring. High-profile clients offering cocaine for blackmail. Spence allegedly boasted CIA connections, paranoid about betrayal.
Died shortly after the report, ruled suicide. Sounds like a potential honey trap at high levels.
Spence's alleged activities suggest a sophisticated blackmail operation targeting influential figures. Purported intel links, paranoia hint at dangerous world. Sudden death as tragic, suspicious end. Many questions remain.
Palmer National Bank. Held accounts for NEPL, the Contra fundraising group. Only other bank used was Irving Trust.
Irving Trust financed Hurwitz's Pacific Lumber takeover, later bought by Bank of New York with Rappaport's help. Connects BONY and Rappaport's IMB.
Shows the financial infrastructure supporting Contras and bank interconnectedness.
Illustrates the specific banks facilitating Contra fundraising. Palmer National, Irving Trust. Irving Trust's acquisition by BONY via Rappaport underscores the complex web within banking, potential links to covert ops, controversial deals.
Jackson Stevens, close relationship with BCCI, introduced Burt Lance, courted by BCCI, to Stevens in Arkansas for National Bank of Georgia purchase talks.
Along with Mokhtar Rieti, politically connected Indonesian banker, also interested in NBG, strategic partnership between Rieti's Lippo Group and Stevens Inc., after Indonesians withdrew.
Shows intersection of global finance, politics, controversial banks like BCCI.
Stevens' BCCI ties, NBG negotiations with Lance and Rieti, highlight global reach of these financial networks, potential collaboration between diverse individuals, sometimes involving banks with questionable reputations.
Robert Anderson, entered Eisenhower admin urged by oil interests. Sec Navy, Sec Def, Treasury Sec, arranged Texas oil tax breaks.
Post-government roles, President of Ventures Ltd., consultancy at Rockefeller Plaza, partner at Loeb, Rhodes, linked to Bronfman interests.
Illustrates the revolving door. Government service, private industry, influenced by powerful interests like oil.
Anderson's career exemplifies that close relationship, moving between government and industry, shaping policies benefiting former industry, underscores significant influence of these connections.
Keating's Lincoln Savings, invested in Saudi European Investment Corp. Keating joined its board. Saudi European gave credit lines to Keating's companies.
Allegations Saudi European was a sham financier in Keating's profit-booking efforts. Goldsmith's Claremont Club membership being sought by Rothschild Inc. with Maxwell to expand U.S. influence connects these players. S&L crisis had international elite financial links. Keating's Saudi European involvement, sham financing allegations, highlight risky fraudulent practices in S&L crisis. Links to Goldsmith, Rothschild Inc., interest reveal involvement of international financial elites in these complex, damaging deals.
Arkansas politics. A ruling oligarchy, Stevens' rising influence. See Joseph Chirvoir, heading Rose Law Firm, Hillary Clinton worked there, pro-business outlook.
Sets the stage for understanding Arkansas's political-economic environment then, especially the powerful Stevens Group. Provides context for figures like the Clintons. Chirvoir's background illuminates dominant forces in the state.
Goldman Sachs structuring Coral Reinsurance to hide AIG as stockholder, spreading stock to select group including Samuel Zell, ties to Gouletis, Cantor.
Zell and Cantor indicted 76 for hiding money in Helliwell Cantor's Castle Bank. Reveals methods to obscure financial interests, involves people with past legal issues, suggests pattern of operating in shadows,
Highlights lack of transparency.
and potential for individuals with history of financial impropriety in seemingly legit ventures. Earlier indictment underscores this.
George H.W. Bush, involved with Harkin Energy late 80s after VP. Soros invested, then left. Harkin's unexpected, lucrative Bahrain oil deal Jan 90.
Raises questions about potential influence peddling, benefits accruing to former high officials via connections.
Especially in sensitive industries like energy.
Definitely raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest, influence wielded in the private sector.
Arkansas drug trafficking in the 80s. Extensive. Potentially linked to Contra arms routes. Barry Seal smuggling in Menna, alleged CIA Medellin links DEA informant assassinated 86.
Allegations of CIA drug trafficking in Arkansas via MENA. Governor Bill Clinton's alleged knowledge. Figures like Terry Reid, Bill Duncan and alleged drug weapon smuggling, tied to Clinton, FBI's Sky King investigation, William Jerry Lasky case.
The Company Network. Former Special Forces, law enforcement and drug smuggling, alleged ties to Wilson, Turple, connections to Kentucky politics, people close to Clinton.
Lassiter admitting first cocaine use via Governor John Y. Brown's business partner linked to the company. Lassiter's tricks with Bill and Hillary Clinton. Paints a picture of Arkansas as a significant drug hub with potential high-level connections.
What's the overall picture of 80s Arkansas?
A really disturbing picture. Major drug hub, alleged links to Contra arms, CIA, state politics. Numerous individuals' investigations suggest deep, potentially systemic involvement in illegal activities.
Arkansas figures role in the national S&L crisis. Beverly Hills S&L, Chairman Thomas Spiegel. James Ringley investigating Arkansas S&L BCCI ties.
Collapse of Madison Guarantee S&L in Arkansas. Connections to Clintons, James McDougal. Whitewater Development Corp. Webster Hubbell at Rose Law Firm doing legal work for Madison Guarantee.
Indicates potential link between Arkansas politics economics and the national financial crisis. Suggests deep-rooted issues.
Significant involvement of Arkansas S&Ls.
Yeah.
Connections to prominent political figures, institutions like BCCI, suggest potential link between state environment and wider 80s financial instability. points to significant financial risk, potential mismanagement.
Finally, Israel granting passports to Semyon Mogilevich and associates, potentially easing access to U.S. financial institutions.
A concerning detail, given Mogilevich's reputation in organized crime.
Raises concerns about exploiting documents.
Yes, potential for individuals with known crime ties to use national identity, travel docs to access financial systems, possibly for illicit purposes like international money laundering.
Well, that was an incredibly deep dive, an intricate web of connections, really.
Quite astonishing to see the threads linking organized crime, intelligence agencies, powerful individuals.
Influencing major historical events, financial systems, often hidden from view, it definitely provides some serious aha moments, understanding the deeper layers.
What's striking is the persistence, the adaptability of these networks over decades. Names change, faces change.
But the underlying patterns seem to endure: cooperation, exploitation.
Exactly. This deep dive certainly leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Considering these historical entanglements, what are the lasting legacies today?
How might they still be shaping events in ways we don't fully grasp?
It's something to really think about and maybe continue investigating on your own.